Male fertility is what is massively declining at rates never seen before. Like, I don't know why your doctor didn't tell you. They know they should be having these conversations. If you are trying to conceive or you want to, anytime in the future, you should.
Where I want to start with you is just why you think male fertility tends to be more overlooked.
Yeah, I think it's become like a cultural thing, right? Like, for the majority of our existence on this planet, we have assumed that men are just always super fertile and women have this very narrow window of time where we could be fertile, right? So there's this dynamic of like, men are always ready to go, women are not. The other piece of it is just like, our bodies carry the baby as women. So the assumption is that women are responsible for the fertility journey. And even more than that, women themselves feel responsible. If I cannot conceive, then I will go above and beyond to do everything in my power to make it happen. Versus we often don't consider that our partners are actually an equal percentage of the equation. And male fertility is what is massively declining at rates never seen before.
Even more than female or similar?
Even more than female, yes. Yeah. So we have stats that have shown that in the last 50 years, sperm counts have went to 50% of what they used to be just 50 years ago. So the rate at which male fertility is declining is very concerning. And for the researchers and providers that are in this space watching this, it's a little bit concerning. It's like we're in a place where we are looking at or looking in the face of what might be a global crisis for our human population. That's how I see it. When a couple sitting with me has fertility issues, or they say, oh, we've been trying for a long time and we can't get pregnant. And my question is always like, okay, have you had your hormones tested to the woman? And have you had your sperm tested to the man, right? Like, that seems very normal to me. And the number of times women are like, well, no, he's never been tested. And I'm like, well, it's been 2 years, 3 years. Like, why isn't he tested? Like, oh, the doctor said he's young, so he's fine. And I'm like, so okay, like, so they just live under what kind of rock is this doctor living under?
That's what I was going to say. Is this just like conventional healthcare where they're not?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Often makes assumptions that don't make it into functional medicine and more holistic care.
Exactly. I think from the traditional side, there's a lot that is disregarded for male fertility because partly the traditional fertility model is try for a while. If it doesn't work, go to IUI. And if that doesn't work, go to IVF. And IUI is it's called intrauterine insemination. It's basically where they take the sperm and like inject it up into the cervix to help it get to the egg faster.
So that sounds like more like a treatment on the sperm side.
Exactly. Okay. So that is essentially it is helping to bypass the need for great motility of the sperm. The sperm have to know where to go and be able to swim to get there.
And that's the standard to start with that treatment. So that right. That's boggles my mind because you're like everything you're explaining. That's kind of what I've seen and observed. Like, for sure, there's different, psychological and behavioral aspects between a woman who's going to be the mother, carry the child, and then if the man's going to be the father. So I get that, but everything you said kind of rings true. There tends to be a huge focus on women, but it's very interesting to hear that even in the traditional route or the most common route, the first step is actually I don't know what to call it, like an intervention related to the sperm. You're not even talking about woman, eggs, uterus, all that.
Yeah. Yeah. So this has changed slightly. I've been doing this for almost 20 years, and there's a shift in men used to come in and say they were never tested. Now they're being tested, thank God. But the answer is still very much the same. Like, it's not a big deal because the doctor knows that the intervention that's coming for them is already going to take care of any sperm issues on the motility. Count and motility will get taken care of with the IUI, because count is essentially, we need millions of sperm because the cervix is essentially killing so many of them as they're swimming through. So if we can bypass the cervix, we can bypass this like protective mechanism that the woman has to only let the best sperm through. And we've bypassed it to get them to where they need to go. It doesn't bypass morphology issues, which we can get into later, but it takes care of 2 out of 3 issues that sperm could be having.
Is this donor sperm or this is the partners?
It could be the partner. Yeah, it could be partner just getting an IUI. The other side is that they could do medicated IUIs, which is Clomid plus the intrauterine insemination. And Clomid essentially deals with anovulation issues. So woman doesn't release the egg. Clomid kind of takes care of it. Like, let's kick the egg out, and then the sperm, let's get the sperm as close as we can. And then hopefully all things will resolve itself. The problem is it only works 20% of the time. So what then? And the next step is IVF, which is in vitro fertilization. And IVF often takes care, again, of a lot of the male factor issues. So O's, we have maybe low sperm quality, we have low sperm morphology. We can pick the best sperm. We will do the selection for you. So survival of the fittest no longer happens. It just says, let's just pick the best sperm, put them into the petri dish with the egg, and hopefully they will fertilize the egg. If that doesn't happen, then the third level intervention is IVF with ICSI, which is intracytoplasmic something. It's basically the sperm getting injected right into the egg to fertilize the egg. So again, like a lot of these interventions are overcoming male factor fertility issues. So the reason I feel like the conventional world doesn't really care about male factor is because they already know the interventions can bypass the need for good, healthy sperm.
Okay. Yeah, it's classic. It's like, you don't need to get healthy. We got, the machines can take care of it. So it does. I mean, some of the things that anyway you're describing sound very mechanistic. So what are some of the potential downsides of that for anyone who likes a more holistic perspective? Like you've mentioned survival of the fittest a few times. That's kind of an interesting, like the physical act of getting pregnant. It seems like that standard of care can accomplish that sometimes, but it's an interesting thing to think about multiple generations down the road. What are the downstream effects of something like that?
The reality is we don't know. Like, there isn't enough long scale studies to say, hey, for the second or third generation after an IVF child, this was the impact. We don't really know. But we do know that there is a much higher chance of autism spectrum disorders in IVF babies. We know that more of them will potentially have health issues. There's a little bit of debate around this, right? Like, if you ask an IVF doctor, will my baby have issues? They're going to be like, definite no. Whereas the holistic world is going to be like, well, probably going to have some impact. That does not mean you shouldn't do IVF, right? Like, I'm not anti-IVF by any means, but I do think that it's important to say, hey, what I'm choosing, if I can do something about it, that's a major if, right? Like, if I can do something about my sperm, should I before I consider doing the intervention. And that's usually where I land. So we have lots of people that choose IVF after addressing the sperm, after addressing the female factor fertility issues. At that point, then we're like, okay, you still want to do IVF? Cool, no problem. You've already addressed all of the underlying things. We've set your body up to essentially like make up for the fact that you are going to choose IVF. Your body is in a fertile, vital state where it's going to be less impactful if you do IVF. But if IVF is overcoming some of the very basic things that the body needs, as far as on the female side, I would say like a basic need for females is safety, security, and calm. Like that's going to put us in a state where reproduction can happen easier. And on the male side, it's really what are the major factors that are making for poor quality sperm? And in the male body, it's like toxins are a really big factor. And a lot of men will say, well, I'm not exposed to any toxins. I don't use makeup. I don't use crappy products. I eat organic, right? Like they can list off all the things that they're doing, yet they're being exposed to toxins because he's a mechanic, right? Like something really basic like that. And if he doesn't deal with the toxins in his body, the fact that toxins affect our epigenetics, the way that our genes are expressing, and that's going to have an impact on the future generation. We know that for a fact, right? So we can't ignore that this man has a bunch of toxins. Who cares what his sperm look like? If he has toxins in his body that are affecting his genes and gene expression, that's going to have an effect on the future health of the baby. So for us, like we like to think of it as like, yes, sperm is one analysis and it's a really good one because when the body is impacted with lots of factors, lots of toxins, hormones out of whack, stress, whatever it is for this guy, the sperm will have it can be a good indicator or a good blinking light saying, hey, something is out of whack. So the body has kind of made reproduction less of a importance because it has these other things to deal with.
Right. And so you mean you just mentioned hormones, but what are there other things? Is it straight sperm testing direct that reveals that, or what are some other markers that you look at, or maybe someone listening who hasn't, gone in for full blown testing, but can see these other markers and get alerted? Because I think that's really a benefit. You could catch this stuff or be aware of it years in advance. Because another classic narrative in fertility is, couples trying to conceive for a long time and then find out that there's whatever difficulties with fertility and just because, it makes sense. You don't really think about it till you want to in a lot of cases. And then, but some of it does take a lot of time to move these things, toxins out of the body, et cetera.
Absolutely. I think I would say that really the semen analysis is a good starting point. And on some level, I feel like men should get a semen analysis once a year. Think of it as like a health check, right? Like if your body's not making sperm, it's basically saying there's a reason why I'm not making sperm. So that's a good starting point. However, there are things like testosterone, which are really easy to check in blood work. Free and total testosterone in men is a really good indicator of whether or not the body is doing what it needs to make the key hormone that is going to indicate whether or not sperm are being produced.
Earlier, we talked about toxins can cause that in the body. And it sounds like injections of testosterone can decrease fertility. Is one not better than the other, but is one impact fertility more, or it all just depends on the person and the levels? And
well, I want to encourage, like, if you are trying to conceive or you want to anytime in the future, not even near future, anytime in the future, you should definitely reconsider supplementing testosterone. That is going to be the fastest way to get your fertility shut down. And I'm not saying it's permanent, like, it's sometimes we can reverse it, but it's a long journey to reversing that. So do not, like, whatever you do, don't supplement testosterone, right? Like, don't take these like hyped, like, muscle boosting things. Like, there's so many products now that actually there was a product, which I cannot remember the name of, that was basically like a muscle gain protein powder-esque thing that was claiming to boost testosterone levels, and it was found to have actual testosterone in it, not on the label. So you have
beware.
to be hyper aware that if fertility is important to you, and it may not be in your 20s, right? Like, you could care less in your 20s whether or not you're going to have a child. But unfortunately, like, this needs to be a conversation that young men are hearing very early in their lives before they get to the point of I'm 13, 14, 15 in high school wanting to bulk up because I want to look good and I want to get all the female attention and whatever, like, all the things that we're thinking about as teenagers, that can have an impact that is far beyond where we're thinking in that moment. So really, like, like, I have a child who's 5. He's, like a general 5-year-old, but I know to be hyper aware and, like, oh, you want to take a supplement? Let's talk about it. Let's talk about which one. Let's make sure it's the right, like, let's make a good choice, so that who knows what you want to do in the future, but we want to leave that option open. So I would say, like, no testosterone ever, ever, ever. If your testosterone is low, you want to get support that you can actually get some help with boosting that testosterone and getting your body to make the testosterone in and of itself. The second piece is testosterone converts to estrogen. So the instant these guys stop taking the testosterone, it converts to estrogen, and that's how they end up with man boobs. Sorry, that's just the reality. So
there's a lot of disclosure missing from the marketing of some of these products, I'm realizing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, unless you're in it and you really understand all of the physiology, it's kind of scary. And, like, as a hormone specialist, I'm a reverent of hormones. I'm like, these hormones are a complicated symphony. And when we start going in and upregulating one and downregulating another, we have to be really mindful that we're going to screw some things up if we're not careful with what it is that we're doing.
Yeah. I love that. That's been one of the biggest things on my health journey, is to realize, like, how much of our mentality is, oh, I don't like this number or this symptom. What's the pill that will solve it? And it seems fast and convenient, but it's not. It's a road that leads to nowhere. And asking these deeper questions that you're posing, like, well, why is that happening, and what is the underlying source? And I find you really have to go 2, 3, 4 layers deeper, because even 2 layers deep, you can sometimes do the same thing. Like, okay, let's just manage this number on a lab test or manage this symptom. But if you really get down to it, then it's just so life-changing. It was life-changing for me. And then people, they get their health back just at, like, a deep level. And when you feel that, I mean, it's so different than a pill that's propping you up. And then, people get really confident because they can walk through life knowing, they have a lot more say in their health than they ever realized, and confident that they know what to do to build it up. And so, yeah, I really resonate with your approach.
Yeah. Thank you.
So you must have a lot of surprised looks and conversations with patients in your office?
Yeah, that happens. That happens a lot. They're like, wait, what? No, why didn't my doctor tell me? Like, I don't know why your doctor didn't tell you. They know they should be having these conversations, but there are testosterone clinics down the street from me that are pumping guys full of testosterone that really shouldn't be getting testosterone, right? So I can go on about that for hours, but really like get educated, like really educated, right? And that's why podcasts like this are so important. It's like really making sure that you have the awareness enough to ask the right questions. It's not, you don't need to know all the answers. You just need to know that you have questions that you can ask to make sure that you're making the best choice for yourself, regardless of who you're working with. So, and I wanted to go back to your other question about toxins. So toxins are kind of, I would say, equally important. Now, everyone doesn't have the same toxin exposure. So like a mechanic is going to have a lot more exposure than someone who eats organic and like doesn't really interact with any toxins per se. But it's important to have the awareness. It's important to know, like, where are the toxins coming in? And believe it or not, a lot of men are really aware that they should drink enough water, but they're drinking it out of plastic water bottles, right? They grab a bottle at work or wherever it is, plastic water bottles. And the toxin in plastic water bottles, BPA or BPS, bisphenol compounds, are the antithesis of sperm and also a killer of testosterone because it's estrogen. They mimic estrogen. So the body's like, oh, too much estrogen, turn down the production of testosterone, which is the precursor to estrogen. The body's infinitely wise. The body's like, oh, I have too much estrogen. How do I regulate? I turn off testosterone, then none of it will convert to estrogen. But you don't have testosterone or estrogen. You have this fake compound called bisphenol. So plastic tends to be one of the biggest sources of male factor fertility issues, and getting rid of those is a really easy way to support fertility now or in the future.
In addition to the toxins, are there any other underlying factors that stick out that you see in majority or more commonly with your patients?
I think along with that is gut and nutrient dysfunction. So if a guy has gut issues, that could be absorption, it could be processing the food and breaking it down and getting it out of the system, excretion. All of those are going to be just little indicators of, hey, there might be some level of gut issue that then is connected to either inflammation or nutrient absorption. So if there are nutritional deficiencies, then the sperm don't have, or the testes don't have what they need as far as nutrition goes to make good quality sperm. So sperm morphology issues are often driven by inflammation and nutrient deficiencies. Whereas motility, yes, there's some nutrient deficiencies, but they're often like sluggish. And that is a slightly different issue. Often liver congestion makes for sluggish sperm, or there are like underlying infections sometimes that could make for sluggish sperm. So really it's not necessarily taking the sperm issue at surface level, but saying, okay, like motility means specific things, morphology means specific things. Like those are deeper rabbit holes that we need to go down to really figure out why this man is not making the sperm that he should. And how do we get his body restored so that he can do that?
Right. Yeah. Well, I really hope that anyone listening, this helps like demystify a little bit of the fertility. And I agree. It's like if our body isn't healthy and strong, then all the processes won't function. Fertility is just one example. There could be others, but looking at it from that lens, at least as a starting point, even in the end, if we need to use some of the amazing technology we have, great. But I really feel health's on a spectrum, right? So what you talked about, if you're moving clients and patients up that spectrum, then both parents and baby will have a better chance of total health.
Yeah. Yeah. And if I can just add to that, like men often feel sidelined on the fertility journey because of the way doctors talk to them. But the reality is like the man is contributing as much as the women. And women, I'm sorry, I know you guys want to be on a pedestal, but the reality is it's a 50-50 equation. Like his genes and what he passed off is just as important as what you passed off. And there is a little bit of like really cool science happening that there is evidence that a baby is going to have some of the mental state and the mental predispositions of the father. So how does that happen? Right? It leads to more questions, but it's cool because the study that I'm thinking of was citing that they were looking at children with high fears, right? Like, why do they have these like weird fear things? And the one I remember was like, this child was fear, like, oh my God, we're going to be broke and we're not going to have any money. And like kind of a weird fear for a child to have. And they linked it back to the state of the father during the pregnancy. So the father was going through a loss of job and was freaking out about the money. And somehow this baby now has this odd fear of like, we're going to be broke and out on the street and not have any money. So like, there's evidence that even though the woman is carrying the child in her body, there is influence of the father throughout that whole process. And it's important to remember that because, yes, you're not carrying the child, yet you have so much influence over this child's development from the conception all the way through pregnancy, birth, and of course, fatherhood. So, like, I like to say that from the aspect of like, we need to be honoring the men, right? Like, we need to be honoring the male side of this equation. And instead of putting men to the side of like, oh, you're just the sperm donor, we could care less what your mental state is like. Actually, it makes a huge difference on what your child will be like. What are the predispositions of this child? And if you can influence that from the beginning, wouldn't you want to? Right. And like most men are like, hell yeah, how do I get in on that? Like, that's the reality I want to live in. So let's make that like the positive spin being, it's like you're more than just a sperm donor and you're like the integral part of this equation.
Yeah, I can completely see men being on board with that, being more of the teamwork idea.
Yeah.
Dr. Simmons, if people want to work with you or follow more of your work, how can they do that?
I'm really active on Instagram. So at Holistic Fertility Doctor is a really easy way to get started and get a hold of me and to see if we can support you.
Great. We'll link to that in the show notes. And thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me, Josh.